Hello, listeners. This is Kat. Welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfic. This will be the continuation of Fall Apart, Collect the Pieces. This will be Part 3, Chapter 5. They said since it's been a couple of weeks, some of your stuff's probably been sold already. Katsuki grumbled, dropping onto the couch next to him. But they're forwarding the list to all the locations, so hopefully some of it'll be pulled off the shelves. It was the morning after, and Katon had come up with a plan of attack as Izuku had slept. First, he decided to reach out to headquarters for all the major donation centers and thrift stores in the city and explain the situation to them. By the time Izuku had woken up, he had sent the collection spreadsheet to 6 different organizations explaining that they'd be searching for the stolen items in the coming days. So far, they'd sounded eager to help, but there was only so much they could do. After all, if something had already been purchased, they were out of luck unless it had been bought with a credit card. And who shopped at thrift stores with credit cards? Some people, sure, but not many. Mina and Eijiro had already started driving around to different thrift stores with his list, hoping to get started while he and Katsuki went through Ochako's things. Hata, Denki, and Hitoshi were taking the debris from the theater to the dump, where they'd also be asking management if it would be possible to track down his notebooks. He wasn't very hopeful on that front. He was pretty sure they were gone for good. All Might's autograph was in one of those notebooks, Hero Analysis number 13. A landmark of the day his life had changed forever. "Thanks, Kashan," he replied. He was currently sitting in front of a pile of Ochako's things. On either side of the pile were 2 boxes, one labeled, "Return to Asshole," and the other labeled, "Sell." Katsuki had made the labels, hoping to get a laugh out of him. There was even a poorly drawn rendition of Ochako on the asshole box, pointy teeth and devil horns included. It just reminded him that the person who he thought he'd be spending his life with had intentionally gone behind his back to ruin things that mattered to him. Katsuki peered into the box to check his progress. "Damn, I really thought you'd bought more of this shit for her," he said, poking through the Return to Asshole box. "I can check again, but I remember most of the things I bought for her," he replied. Katsuki lifted a handbag out of the box, eyebrows raised. Izuku looked at it and then at his companion, waiting for him to speak his mind. "This is the 3rd fuckishly expensive handbag I've seen in that box," he muttered, digging through again to pick out the others. He'd grown up with Kachan, so he was aware of what dressing nicely looked like. He could identify when something was stylish and when it wasn't, even if he wasn't particularly stylish himself. That didn't mean that he could glean an item's quality or value, though. Usually when he bought a fancy gift that featured fashion, he'd defer to Katsuki's expertise. "They're cute," he replied, shrugging. "She likes cute things." "Deku, I'm saying there's no way she could have bought all 3 on her salary," Katsuki explained. Izuku could tell that his patience was thin, and knew that he was only refraining from snapping because he was already upset. He'd be grateful, but his trepidation was dominant. "How do you know?" "They were all released in the last 6 months from major labels. It would have been outlandishly expensive for her. You're a top 10 hero, so it's a drop in the bucket for you, but she only cracked top 50 this year." Izuku grabbed his laptop from the table, opening his bank statement. Money wasn't that important to him. He had more than he needed, and mostly used it to take care of the people who mattered to him. He didn't spend his time watching numbers grow and decline. The last time he'd really examined his finances was when he'd set up Quad, Quirkless United Against Discrimination, a resource and advocacy organization for quirkless people, especially kids. He'd provided every cent of the startup costs and pumped money into forming tolerance and advocacy programs, researching institutional bias surrounding quirks, and creating resources for quirkless youth in crisis. Katsuki had been front and center, volunteering time to speak at schools and provide training to teachers on quirkless discrimination and the responsibility to stop it. The time before that, he'd helped set up education funds for Eri, Koda, Maharo, and Katsuma, enough to pay for college if they decided to go. The point was, he was relaxed about it. If someone asked, he would usually give. He was involved in philanthropic work, and he provided for his loved ones. If he noticed something that Ochako liked, he'd get it for her, just to see her smile. The thought that she might have been using his bank account to fund her purchases without asking wasn't significant in the face of everything else she'd done, but it made him wonder if he'd come off as the type of partner who would not give when asked. He'd always felt that if it made a loved one happy, he'd give them the shirt off his back. He clearly hadn't come across that way to his wife, though. As he scrolled through the bank statements over the past 6 months, even before they were married, his stomach sank. "Look for an Hermes purchase," Katsuki instructed. When he found it, his eyes bugged out of his skull. 4,239,700 yen. "That's a work-studies intern's annual salary," he breathed. "That's this one," Katsuki said, holding up a dusty pink bag with a deep purple band. She'd gotten rid of his most cherished possessions while going behind his back to buy a handbag worth at least half the average sidekick's salary, and she'd accused him of wasting money. He didn't care that she wanted nice things. He cared that she ruined the things he cared about, then went behind his back to fund her own interests. He cared that she could have asked, and he would have given. He cared that she chose to build herself up by tearing him down. Katsuki kept pulling things out of the return to asshole box, pointing them out as the statement in front of him. In the end, she'd spent 28 million yen since they'd gotten married, and 17 million before then. He wasn't even angry. He was just exhausted. Fucking asshole, Katsuki hissed, throwing each item into the sell box with far more force than necessary. Didn't even ask. That seemed to be a running theme. She didn't even have the decency to ask about any of it. No room for negotiation nor communication, so utterly self-serving that it felt like he didn't know her at all. Maybe he didn't. I was looking at that self-adjusting weight rack, and you bought it for me as a just-because gift. You're a fucking just-because gift person. I bet if she dropped a hint, you would have bought her the whole fucking store, he snapped. Yeah, probably. I'll go through the whole box and itemize everything, Katsuki continued. You should go after her for credit card fraud, or theft, or some shit. No, he replied. I'm not going to drag this out by making it a bigger thing. I don't want to ruin her career or make her miserable. Katsuki went to interrupt, but he held up his hand to stop him. That won't make me feel better. I'm going to file for divorce, sell what she bought on my dime, and look for my collection. I don't need revenge. I just need this to be over. Katsuki glared at him, eyes hard. He wanted to argue. Katsuki always wanted to argue. It was a part of his charm. But Izuku didn't want to deal with this by beating her down. He wanted to focus on what mattered to him, and that didn't include her anymore. Kachan seemed to arrive at the same conclusion, shoulders dropping and glare softening to a displeased scowl. Kachan understood him better than anyone. Even if he didn't agree, he understood. Fine, he grumbled. But you're letting me take care of selling this shit. I don't want you to have to look at it any longer than you have to. A command, not a request. He wasn't very inclined to argue anyway, though. Fine, he said, tilting his head back to rest on the back of the sofa. There was still a bunch of her things to sort, now with a finer comb. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He wanted to be anywhere else. Thankfully, Kachan took that part over, cross-referencing everything. He didn't remember buying with his bank statement, just to make sure nothing else slipped through the cracks. Somebody knocked at the door, and Katsuki stood to get it. Izuku kept his eyes averted from the cell box, unwilling to see how much it had filled. Hey, Mito, Mina said, traipsing into the room with Eijiro at her heels. Hey, guys, he replied, giving them a thin smile. She was carrying a small stack of takeout boxes. I have a little bit of good news, she told him. She stepped aside so that Eijiro could step around her. We found some of the commemorative pins and keychains at the thrift store by her agency. Eijiro set a small bag on the table, and Izuku pulled it toward himself with shaking hands. His stomach churned as he looked inside. 10 pins and 4 keychains tucked inside. Every pin had belonged to a set, and, sorting through them, none of those sets were complete. It was a start, though. Honestly, it was better than he'd hoped for. How many did you hit? Kachan asked them. Izuku ran his thumb over one of the keychains. It was from a merch line that promoted All Might's first-ever movie. 7, Eijiro replied. The ones between our agency and Ingenium. We took our time. 2 of the keychains were already on the floor, so we wanted to make sure we didn't miss anything. They'd better start pulling shit from the list I sent, Katsuki huffed. Eat, nerd. Lawyer's gonna be here soon. Izuku nodded, placing the keychain back in the bag. He'd pack them more carefully once the lawyer left, to protect them until he could recreate their display case. He ate, and listened as Katsuki chatted with Mina and Eijiro, taking out his phone and pulling up a Maps app. What's that? He asked. Kat's made a list of all the local thrift stores, Mina explained. Katsuki flushed, not looking up from his phone. We split them up, and we're marking off the stores as we hit them. No matter how shitty he felt, knowing that Kachan was looking out for him made him feel warm. His eyes stung, and he sniffed, overwhelmed by gratitude for him and sadness that he even needed to go that far. Don't fucking cry, Katsuki groaned, balling up a paper towel and throwing it at his face. I hate it when you cry, goddammit. Sorry, Kachan, he said, lip trembling. Thanks for doing this, He broke off, swallowing past the lump in his throat. I'm very grateful. You do the same for me, dumbass, he growled, gritting his teeth. You're my best fucking friend. Now shut the fuck up and eat. You can cry later. He let out a watery laugh. Okay, Kachan. I have another project for you fucks, Katsuki said, standing. We're almost finished sorting through her shit. When we finish, can you take this shit to Bubble Bitch? Sure, dude, Eijiro agreed. And while you're waiting, photograph all this shit and note down any damage, he said, kicking the cell box. I'm gonna start selling the flashier shit online tonight. No problem, Mina agreed. I have an appointment at UA at 4 to go over intern requirements for the meteor agency, but I can come back after, too. All right, Kotsky muttered. Thanks, losers. Love you too, jackass, Mina huffed, kicking his foot. By the time the lawyer had showed up, they were done eating and Izuku and Kotsky had resumed sorting. Mina had started photographing while Eijiro took down notes on scuff marks and tears on everything in the box. Mr. Fujiwara, Izuku greeted the lawyer dully, smiling politely without it reaching his eyes. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Young Todoroki was very insistent, Fujiwara replied as Izuku led him through the foyer and sat him down at the dining table. Kotsky was already seated, imposing and terse. Dynamite, he greeted the blonde. Kata nodded, a small jerky movement meant more to intimidate than acknowledge. Izuku placed a hand onto his shoulder as he sat. This should be fairly straightforward since I have a solid prenup and we've only been married for 2 months, he explained. I want to get this over with as quickly as possible. Fujiwara nodded, pulling out a notepad. Why don't you tell me everything that happened? Izuku told Fujiwara what had happened up until yesterday, and by the end the lawyer wasn't horrified, but he did look displeased. I'll need a copy of your prenup, but I don't think you'll have much trouble, he said. It's not just about the merch and the notebooks, Kotsky told him. He'd thrown an arm over the back of Izuku's chair, a steady weight across his shoulders. We were going through her shit today, trying to figure out what to send to her and what we were going to sell to recoup some of the losses. We realized that she's been buying crap with this credit card without telling him since before they were married. Fujiwara sat forward in his seat. That could... I don't want to press charges. I just want her out of my life, Izuku insisted. Fujiwara didn't look like he liked that plan, and by the way that Kotsky tensed, he agreed. The lawyer sighed, leaning back. If you change your mind, I'd be happy to help. In the meantime, I'd like to encourage you to be meticulous as you separate your possessions. Keep a record of everything that you're returning to her and everything that you're retaining. Anything you retain, make sure you could find it on your bank balance or receipts, and record those items too. She was willing to go behind your back on multiple occasions to get her way. That behavior is likely to translate into divorce proceedings, and you don't want to give her any ammunition. I'd also like to offer to help with the handoff. Izuku frowned. Why? He asked. If you provide me with an itemized list of everything returned along with everything you're retaining, I can draw up a release that says that she received all the enclosed items, he explained. I can also sign off as a custodial witness to the handoff. Kotsky nodded. We were going to send Mina Ashido to do the drop-off once we were done sorting. If you're available this afternoon, I can have her coordinate with you. He frowned, pulling out his phone and flicking through it. It looks like I'm free after 5 p.m. If you'd like to serve papers at the same time as you return her belongings, it would be best to wait until tomorrow afternoon, though. I'll need to look through your prenup to see where we stand, and I may call you during the day to confirm details. We can work with that, Izuku replied quietly. From there, I'd meet Ashido here, go through the items, sign off that I've seen everything on your list, and have you seal the boxes in front of me. Ashido and I would deliver both the possessions and the divorce papers to her in person, and have her sign that she received her property and the divorce papers. The following morning, I would file your divorce with the ward office. Izuku swallowed, tearing up. And then it's done? He asked. And then it's done, he confirmed. As long as no other disputes arise, which they shouldn't, since we're preempting that with documentation. He nodded. Seems simple enough, he said. He hated the thought that he'd have to be meticulous because Ochako might try to screw him over. He'd never thought she was the type until yesterday. The feeling of distrust was new, and it was ugly, twisting around his heart and up his throat. He hated it. Kachan squeezed his shoulder. We'll finish tonight, and I'll email you a copy of his prenup, the blonde said, taking out his phone and adding it to a list in his notes app. Izuku leaned over to look at it, but Kachan jerked the phone away and pushed his face in the other direction. Fucking nosy, he barked. Izuku spluttered a laugh, surprised. It's about me. Do you even have a copy of my prenup? Kotsky looked at him like he was stupid, which, well, maybe he was. It's on your computer. I'll use your computer to email him, dipshit. Oh, right. Despite the situation, Fujiwara looked amused. Thank you for your help, Dynamite. Bakugo, he interrupted. Bakugo, the lawyer corrected. Yeah, whatever, he grunted. We've a meeting tomorrow morning that we can't miss. Other than that, I'll make sure the idiot answers his phone. Right, they had an appointment with the Hero Commission in the morning to discuss the contents of his notebooks. He was glad that Kachan had told him to disclose the notebooks years ago. The commission had been uncomfortable with them being in an unsecured location, so he'd contracted Hatsume to build a security system to pacify them. It had worked. They'd signed off on and only requested that they inform him of any potential security breaches. They knew every person keyed into his biometric access and every person who had a house key. They periodically checked the security footage at his front gates for suspicious activity. Knowing the measures that Izuku took to keep the information safe, they weren't likely to hold him accountable for its loss, especially since they'd approved it. But they would want to know what was in his notebooks, to the best of his ability. "Don't know how long that'll take," he admitted. "I'm going to be brainstorming tonight, but there's over a decade of material to cover." "Worst case scenario is that it takes an extra day," Fujiwara told them. "I can message you to let you know when we're done," he offered. Katsuki squeezed his shoulder again, silent and supportive. "Sure. You can reach me by text or email. I check both regularly," he said. He put away his notepad. "Is there anything else you'd like to talk about, or shall I get started?" "That's all I can think of," Izuku replied. He turned to Katsuki. "Kachan?" Katsuki's jaw clenched. "If Deku decides to press charges in the future, can anything be done about the people who helped her?" "Kachan." "I know you don't want to, and I know Icy thought apologize, but they didn't know that she didn't have my permission." "What about Glasses?" Katsuki asked. "We don't know how involved he was. I know you don't want to make it hostile, but you gotta protect yourself too, nerd." "I can make some suggestions," Fujiwara assured them. "You don't have to act on them unless you feel like it. It's good to have options." "People you thought you could trust came into your home and violated a space that was important to you," Katsuki added. "Be prepared, Deku." As much as he wanted to be done with this, he knew they were right. Izuku slumped in his seat. "Fine," he agreed. "Thank you." "Of course, I'll be in touch," he said. He picked up his bag and stood. "Remember to send over the prenup." Katsuki stood and shook his hand, and Izuku followed after. When Fujiwara left, Katsuki took him by the shoulders and turned him so they were face to face. "How are you doing, nerd?" It was rare for Kachan to be so gentle with him. His gaze was serious and concerned, and under it, Izuku felt himself crumbling. His lip trembled, and he looked down when his eyes started watering. "I'm tired." He stiffened in surprise when Katsuki tugged him forward, arms wrapping around his shoulders to hug him. "Sorry everything's so shitty right now, nerd. You're kicking ass, though." Izuku nodded against his shoulder, tears escaping despite how his eyes were squeezed shut to stop them. He was sick of crying. It felt like he'd been crying ever since he'd come home yesterday. "Thanks for being here, Kachan," he murmured. "Don't know what I'd do without you." Katsuki pulled back, a small smirk on his lips. It was probably the closest he'd get to an affectionate smile. "Same thing, just a hell of a lot slower," he teased, and Izuku swatted his arm. "Seriously, though, you've got this, and I've got your back," he promised. Izuku looked up at him, teary-eyed and tired, but so fucking thankful for Katsuki Bakugo. And for the first time in years, he wondered, just for a moment, what his life would have looked like in a world where Katsuki, brave, bold, and beautiful, had loved him back. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 5 of Fall Apart, Collect the Pieces. Chapter 6 will be next. I hope you all are still enjoying, and as always, thank you so much for listening.